right. Today we are diving into Cordell Keandre Hammond's oral thesis, Discourse on Doing. And really, it's a fascinating journey into the stories that make us who we are, and maybe even a guide to taking control of that story yourself.
So, the whole thing kicks off with this really powerful idea, the massive gap between who we are deep down and the person we perform for the world. Hammond suggests that, for a lot of us, life starts out on a stage. The real trick is figuring out who you are when that curtain finally comes down.
Now, to really get what he's arguing, you first have to understand the stage he grew up on. Hammond actually frames his entire early life as one big performance, and that performance is what set up this really profound conflict inside him.
He talks about becoming a total expert at figuring out what other people wanted from him. He says it became his business to learn them, their words, their songs, their language, sometimes even before I knew myself, just to keep the peace.
And this right here captures a feeling I think a lot of us can relate to, right? That sense of being a side character in a play you didn't even write. For Hammond, this feeling of being secondary in his own life, well, that became the central problem he knew he had to solve.
You know, every great story has a turning point. And for Hammond, it was this single act of protest that completely shifted his world. It moved him away from just playing a role to starting this deep, personal investigation into who he really was.
Yeah, this one moment basically pushed him to throw out the script he'd been following his entire life and start asking his own questions. And that path of self-education, that's what eventually led him all the way to graduate school.
The year is 2017. As he tells it, he took a knee on his college campus at SUNY Onia, and that single act, he says, changed the trajectory of my life. It was this very public statement that kicked off a deeply private journey.
So this experience just opened the floodgates. It led him to question the very foundations of the world around him. He started digging into everything from colonialism to racism, and it all kept coming back to one simple, essential question. Why? Why are things the way they are?
And to answer that why, Hammond develops this really unique way of looking at the past, one that goes way deeper than just dates and events, and gets into the actual psychology of history itself.
And this right here is the absolute core of his thesis. See, traditional history is great at telling us what happened, the dates, the battles, the laws, but psychohistory, the way Hammond presents it, asks a much deeper question. Why did it happen? It tries to understand the collective mindset, the cultural programming and the group motivations that were driving those events in the first place.
And he brings in this quote from psychohistorian Lloyd DeMoss to make a really key distinction. The point isn't to replace history. It's about adding this crucial introspective layer to it. It's about moving from just the event to the motivation behind the event.
So this is his method in a nutshell. He uses individual, personal stories, these oral histories, to uncover those invisible currents of human motivation that shape the world we see. It's all about finding the big story hidden inside the small ones.
Okay, so armed with this new method of looking for the why, Hammond turns the lens away from his own story and points it at a much, much larger one. His thesis is this really challenging re-examination of American history and identity, and he's searching for the psychological programming that's running behind the whole national narrative.
Now, just to be super clear, we're exploring the arguments that are presented in his thesis. He uses this psychohistorical method to challenge conventional history, basically suggesting that a lot of what we learn is a form of cultural programming.
And his analysis leads to some pretty provocative conclusions. For example, he argues that colonization isn't just a physical act of taking land, but it's a psychological one, a language processing system that actually redefines reality itself. He traces how entire identities were stamped out or just made up, and how even the name of the nation shifted to reflect a new imperial mindset. The central idea here is that a lot of today's big conflicts, they aren't physical. They're psychological and spiritual battles being fought over perception and narrative.
And he uses this incredibly powerful quote from Malcolm X to ground all these kind of abstract arguments about identity and psychology. It brings it all back to the tangible reality of land and belonging, connecting the psychological to the physical.
So, how does this all come together? Well, the thesis doesn't just hang out in the world of academic theory. This is where he brings it all back home, turning this method into a really powerful tool for your own personal healing and empowerment.
He brings in this idea from the scholar Savannah Shange: writing is ancestor work. And that's such a powerful concept, right? The idea that writing your own story isn't just for you,
but it's a way of connecting with the past and doing work for the people who came before you. He connects all of this to the field of narrative medicine, which is basically a practice that sees storytelling as a fundamental path to healing. It's a way to make sense of everything we've been through and to reclaim some control over our own lives.
So ultimately, the thesis gives us a kind of path forward that anyone can apply. It's really a call to action, to stop being a supporting character in someone else's story and to finally become the lead author of your own.
And that leaves us with one last, really provocative thought. It's a question for all of us, really. If you were not consciously, deliberately writing your own story, who is?